the late 1970s, exploitation cinema was all the rave. These films were usually low budget and almost always focused on shocking audiences with controversial and or disturbing topics. Of course, as times changed, so did what the public deemed shocking. And so most of these films either became cult classics for audiences to simply make fun of, or were forgotten altogether. However, regardless of the era, some things are simply far too horrific to ever fail to be shocking or disturbing. Hence, over 40 years after the film's release, the horror classic I Spit on Your Grave, BKA Day of the Woman, remains one of the most controversial and talked about films of all time.
This is the bottom shelf.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
The story follows a New York City writer who heads up to a secluded cabin in the woods to write her first novel. While there, she is heartlessly ravaged by 4 country boys and left for dead. Surviving the assault, she carefully plots and implements horrific, bloody revenge against her attackers. Independently distributed by writer, director, editor, and co-producer Meir Zarchi in late 1978, Day of the Woman drew little attention on its limited rural drive-in circuit run. Meir pulled it due to hardly making anything back on a marketing cost, and it was quickly forgotten. Then a few years later, legendary exploitation producer/distributor Jerry Gross gave the film a wide release. He retitled it to the now notorious I Spit on Your Grave, and the rest, as they say, is history.
TV commercials like that one exploiting the plight of women in danger, those ads have been saturating television for the past 2 years. And the summer and fall of 1980 are the worst yet. They signify a disturbing new trend at the movie box office, one we'll be discussing on this special edition of Sneak Previews. Across the aisle from me is Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
And this is Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times. Now, normally on...
The film's infamy proceeded to go through the roof, garnering the attention of mainstream critics and their scathing, narrow-minded views. A vile bag of garbage, proclaimed the late, oft the great, but sometimes imprudent Roger Ebert. He and partner in pretentiousness, the late Gene Siskel, led a misguided campaign against films featuring women in danger, with this as its leading example and prime target.
A lot of people have the wrong idea. They identify these films with earlier thrillers like Psycho, or even a more recent film like Halloween, which we both like. These films aren't in the same category. These films hate women. And unfortunately, the audiences that go to them don't seem to like women too much either. Now, we go to see these films in movie theaters. These are not the kinds of movies where they have nice private little screenings for the critics. And to sit there surrounded by people who are identifying not with the victim, but with the attacker, with the killer, who are cheering these killers on, is a very scary experience.
Yeah, the movies are...
In addition to critical sentiments like Ebert's, the MPAA grudgingly gave the film an R rating, only for a producer to add sexually violent footage to earn the infamous X rating. Overseas, the director of public prosecutions placed Grave on the Video Nasties list, effectively banning it from home video sale and distribution under Britain's Obscene Publications Act. Ironically, all of this became positive publicity, as genre fans lapped the controversy up. In fact, it could be argued that without Ebert's eviscerating Chicago Sun-Times review, the film would not hold nearly the weight it does now. In hindsight, he would have been better off ignoring it entirely. One of the problems with Ebert's review is that he seemed to take more of an issue with the vile audience he saw it with more than the film itself. In Ebert's review, he was justifiably horrified by some of the audience's reaction as he watched. During one of the extended assaults, a male audience member supposedly called out, "That was a good one. That'll show her." During the latter half, when our heroine gets her vengeance, a female audience member shouted things that seemed to demonstrate, quote, feminist solidarity for the character. You cannot predict your audience. He could have seen the film with another audience that was disgusted by the film and said nothing, but he didn't. The audience's disturbing reaction clearly affected his reaction and sent him on a whirlwind of virtue signaling and moral panic evoking that seems utterly ridiculous in retrospect. Looking back on it, it's quite clear Meir's film indeed has artistic merit. He filmed the defilement scenes the only way they could work, as a sort of anti-entertainment, an exercise in audience alienation, unabetted by such Hollywood mechanisms of manipulation as a musical score and, for the most part, editing. The horrific scenes play out casually and realistically, not dramatically. Their shock value arises from the matter-of-fact nature of the crimes. Here's a director pulling no punches, rubbing our noses in filth, degradation, and abuse, and seeing how much we can stomach. Meir, who was inspired to make the film after a real-life experience with the subject matter, is reminding us that these crimes do, in fact, happen in reality.
It's you I wanted.
The debates about the deeper meaning that this film has stirred up since its release will have you going down an endless rabbit hole. Depending on who you ask, it's either venomously misogynistic or the ultimate feminist movie. In reality, it seems to merely be a case of cooking up a scenario in which the bad guys are so irredeemably vile that the filmmakers are free to depict the most violent and gruesome revenge sequences their heart desires. And if people read more into it, then so much the better. Camille Keaton, who previously had generated a unique filmography in Italian giallo productions, is transfixing on screen as her heroine, Jennifer. It's a performance of scant dialogue, but throughout her bedraggled and eventual cathartic vengeance, she's reminiscent of a 70s era
Isabelle Adjani
as an ethereal beauty pushed to a point of no return, and content-wise becomes a prototype of similar territory explored via Isabelle Hubert's character in Paul Verhoeven's 2016 film Elle.
I rented a summer house here, right by the edge of the river. Never even seen it before.
Bet you're gonna like it here.
I intend to.
Not a shy woman, Jennifer reaches her temporary home and is so enraptured with the riverside location she immediately undresses and goes for a swim. This gives the audience the first glimpse of nudity. It's also Meir's first attempt to create sexual arousal in the viewer, a response he will soon turn to disgust, followed by horror. After barely surviving her assault, Jennifer wakes up and takes a bath and goes to bed. After the shock wears off, she contemplates what to do. She smokes, takes walks in the forest, and finally decides to kill the motherfucker who violated her.
Forgive me.
One of the most infamous moments of the film is when Jennifer castrates one of her assailants in an elongated scene in the bathtub. The scene is shocking for many reasons, one of which is the screen time given to a male victim wailing and sitting with his violation. Too many male victims in these type of movies are dispatched quickly, and the time it takes Jason Voorhees to split a teenager in twain. Female victims aren't exactly let off the hook so easily. In fact, torture scenes involving male victims tend to be the most memorable parts of horror movies like The Loved Ones, Audition, and even Hostel. This isn't necessarily due to bias on the viewer's part, but a relative scarcity within genre content. It's just not done as often. I Spit on Your Grave is a striking and gallant motion picture, gravely misunderstood, but it does have a few noticeable problems. For one, we do not really get to know the female protagonist very much. After being assaulted and bruised and cut up, she gets well very fast. Too fast, perhaps. And although she murders the men for vengeance, she never quite is able to fully emulate the breadth of emotion that might come with such a personal ordeal. Maybe what Meir was attempting to do by choosing to go this route in the finale was to show that she had become numb inside from what had happened to her. Indeed, it is not out of the realm of possibility that she very well could be on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Looking back at the aforementioned video nasty list, and many of the films look rather quaint today, it's hard to believe anyone took stuff like this seriously.
Mama! You murdered her! You murdered her!
I Spit on Your Grave is different. It hasn't lost an ounce of its power. It remains one of the list's most shocking, appalling, and disturbing films. It's also one of the best. Those willing to defend the film do so on the grounds that I Spit on Your Grave is as merciless and relentless as the brutal acts that it's attempting to portray, raw and unflinching. At the time, cult film buffs awaited Meir Zarchi's next movie, only to be disappointed with 1985's Don't Mess With My Sister. This was it for Meir's film career. He would dabble in this space down the road, but it wasn't the same. But even though his career was short, Meir will always have a place in exploitation film history. Overall, I Spit on Your Grave isn't perfect, but it delivers. Meir provides us with a true cinematic train wreck. While the acting, camera work, and general plot are certainly below average, the film never strives to be anything more than what it is: a shocking, disturbing exploitation flick showcasing brutality and forcing viewers to deal with this very real issue, while outright asking them, what would you do? Perhaps the only thing not shocking is that the film is still being talked about to this day. Much like any train wreck, for some reason, no matter how horrific it is, we just can't look away. All things considered, it's still very much a must-see, if you're into this sort of thing. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comment section below. We'll see you next time.